Jay Leno. Most know him as the former host of The Tonight Show, which he hosted for over 20 years. But in the car community, we also know him for his incredibly impressive collection of cars, which is arguably one of the most impressive around. Today, we're going to take a look at the most expensive cars that Jay has owned. And these are really in no particular order. Let's start things off with the 1906 Stanley Steamer Vanderbilt Cup Racer. In May of 1906, Charles J. Swain and John Wilkins Jr. of the Cape May Automobile Club announced that they intended to purchase two specially built Stanley Steamer racers to compete in the American Elimination Trial for the 1906 Vanderbilt Cup race. Swain had proudly announced to the automobile trade journals that preliminary negotiations were made for the purchase of two Stanley Steamers guaranteed to do a mile in 30 seconds, incapable of standing up for the Vanderbilt Cup car journey. Unfortunately, the racers were never even entered into the 1906 American Elimination Trial. Freeland Stanley became ill, and the Stanley brothers were unable to finish the cars in time for the September race. And one of these cars just so happened to end up in Jay Leno's collection. This is valued at roughly $275,000 USD. Next up is a car that really needs no introduction. This is probably one of the most iconic poster cars of all time. This is the 1986 Lamborghini Countach, and these are valued up to $1.8 million. Next up is a 2017 Ford GT, and this is the first model year for the second generation Ford GT, and clearly a very wise investment as these cars shot up rather quickly in value. This second generation marked 50 years since the GT40 won the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans, and these are currently valued anywhere from 1.3 to 2 million. Next up is a pretty interesting one. This is the 1963 Chrysler Turbine, and the Chrysler Turbine was an experimental two-door hardtop coupe powered by a turbine engine produced by Chrysler from 1963 to 1964. Now, a total of 55 were made, 5 being prototypes. All but 9 of these cars were destroyed. The remaining were shown or privately sold to collectors, and Jay Leno bought the car for an alleged $415,000 USD, and he's one of 2 people that own a 1963 model. The actual value for this car I couldn't find, but it is potentially in the millions. And if you're curious about the build cost, adjusted for inflation, it's about $450,000 USD. Next on the list is probably a car that doesn't really need introduction either, and one of my personal favorites, the McLaren P1. This is the plug-in hybrid hypercar from McLaren, and these are valued around 1.35 to 2 million USD. Next, we have the 1928 Bentley Speed 6. The Speed 6 was introduced in 1928 as a more sporting version of the Bentley 6.5 liter. The racing version of the Speed 6 would go on to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans in both 1929 and 1930, and it would become the most successful racing Bentley. The value of this car is anywhere from 1 to 3.4 million. Then we have a 1939 Lagonda V12 Le Mans. The Lagonda V12 was produced by the British company Lagonda from 1938 to 1940, and the engine was designed by W.O. Bentley, the founder of Bentley. The value of this car sits at around 2.56 million. Next up, we have a legendary car. This is the 1967 Lamborghini Miura P400, and this is the first iteration of the Miura, of which 275 were built, and this is the first supercar to feature a rear mid-engine 2-seat layout, which has since become a mainstay in high-performance cars. The value of this sits at about 3.5 million, and it is definitely worth it for this icon of a vehicle. Next, we have one of my favorite cars from Mercedes-Benz, the 1955 Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing Coupe. In this really crazy, cool, awesome, lots of different adjectives car from Mercedes, sits at around 2 to 6.8 million in value. Next, we have the 2010 Koenigsegg CCXR Trevita. The CCXR Trevita is a very limited production car, unveiled by Koenigsegg in 2009. And it's about the same in every way as the original CCXR, except for the fact that it uses a special white carbon fiber for the body. And this is valued at around $4.8 million. These next two cars are without a doubt the most expensive ones in the collection. And this first one is probably one that everybody knows and probably McLaren's most famous car. It is the McLaren F1. And the value of this car today sits at around 20 million USD. And finally, we have the 1934 Duesenberg Walker Coupe. Now, if you know Jay Leno, you know he's a big fan of Duesenbergs. According to Jay, this one is the most expensive ever made, and it cost around 25,000 USD in 1934. If we adjust for inflation, that's almost $430,000 today. This one in particular was built for Lilly Pharmaceutical president Josiah Lilly, and this coupe is the only Duesenberg built with aerodynamic bodywork, which designers were just beginning to experiment with in the 1930s. And the value of this car today rivals the McLaren F1 at around 20 million USD. Which of these cars was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.